Welcome to a new episode from American Pulse. Today we have a very special guest, Judge Jeinin Beyro. Welcome to the show, Judge Jeinin. A lot of Egyptians are watching your clips circulating over Facebook, and they noticed that you've been very concerned about the Egyptian future and the presidential election and what's going on in Egypt. So before we go in details, would you like to give us a little bit brief summary about yourself and when did you start working on the media and the whole?
Okay. All right. You don't want me to go all the way back, do you?
Yeah.
You know, like prenatal care and stuff like that?
No, that's way too far.
Okay. All right. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm happy that you're doing this, and I've been a prosecutor, a judge, and a DA for 32 years.
Westchester County. Right?
Westchester County, and for those of you in Egypt who may not know where that is, it's right outside of New York City. It's a county of about 1 million people. And I started as a young lawyer and got very interested in the criminal justice system. And so most of my career has been about law and criminals. And just on the more positive side, I started the first domestic violence unit in the nation in the United States in 1978. My children will tell you that it was when the laws were written on stone tablets. It was so long ago. Mm-hmm. But I have been a fighter for the rights of women and children and the silent crime victim in this country. So from there, I became kind of a spokesperson for crime victims. I was always doing press conferences. And, you know, the segue to the media was almost a natural thing for me when I made a decision that, 32 years is really enough. I was the, first woman Supreme Court judge in Westchester. I was the first woman DA. I was the first woman to try a murder case. I was the first woman president of the New York State DAs. And, it was a lot of great stuff, but I decided to take a turn, and I had a court show for which I won an Emmy, and which I thought was kind of a hoot. And then I went to work for Fox, and I work for the Fox News Channel, which is the most popular cable network in the United States. Yeah. And it is a network where my boss Roger Ailes has given me the opportunity to talk about issues that are passionate for me, and to just come right up to date. Egypt was one of those issues, and although I've run for office 5 times, and I know politics, and I know that politics is a blood sport, especially in New York, especially if you're the first woman for a particular office. But at the same time, what I see going on in Egypt, and the reason I started getting involved, was because I saw some similarities between what was going on in Egypt and the revolution that created this country. Mm-hmm. And so I have been very outspoken about Egypt and the Egyptian people.
I saw a couple of pictures on your Facebook page in Egypt. Have you been to Egypt recently?
I was in Egypt in April of this year, 2014, and I've been to Egypt twice before. Mm-hmm. I love the desert. I mean, I love the weather. I'm one of the few people who loves it. And I feel very passionate about the Middle East. I think that, Egypt, like Greece, it was the beginning of, so many things that we have, catapulted on, that we have used in society, whether it's the things that Egyptians have done in government or math or science, or, you go back to some of the history of what the Egyptians have done, and you worry, or at least I worried when I saw what was happening in Egypt after the June 30th revolution.
After or before?
Before, when, I think it was, that's a very good question, and I'm very happy to answer it, because it wasn't until the Egyptian people came out and said, we are not going to tolerate this. When you have 30, 33, 35 million Egyptians, according to Google Earth, who come out and say, no more, you cannot suspend the Constitution, you cannot impose Sharia law, you cannot tell us that we all have to wear a veil, you cannot do X, Y, or Z. They surround the homes of the judges, then you say it's wrong. But, you know, what Morsi was doing. And then the Americans were saying, but he was democratically elected. And my take was, yeah, so was Hitler.
Yes.
And for me, it was very clear that a democracy is when the people come out and say, no more.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I started, you know, talking about Egypt, and then apparently my opening statement on Egypt went viral over there. They translated it in Arabic, and my mother, who was raised in Lebanon, but was born here, was very excited about that, and I was as well, only because I felt that it resonated over there, and that maybe I was onto something. So I ended up going to Egypt, and I was very critical before I went to Egypt of the Obama administration. When you have the United States government that was supporting Morsi, who clearly was ousted by those 35 million people, whether it's at the ballot box or in the streets, and America, of all places, should recognize, you know, how we started and what we were about. And I liken the two. I liken what's going on in Egypt now to the beginning of democracy in the United States. I mean, there are patriots on both sides. Yes. And as a friend of mine, he became a friend after Shafiq Gaber, talks about seeing Egypt in this East-West initiative through the Gaber Foundation, seeing Egypt through the eyes of the Egyptians. You know, we Americans want you to do this and we want you to do that, but it's really more about what you need to do to get to whatever you perceive to be a democracy. And I was critical of Obama for not continuing to send the Apache helicopters, the Abrams tanks, the military support, and the monies that were promised.
Yeah, I think that, you know, some of those aids were released a couple of days ago from the American administration to the Egyptian government.
I understand that they were going to Fort Hood in the interim, during the interim government, and you know, which may or may not be fine. But when you've got problems like Egypt had in the Sinai, and when you've got problems, you know, where parts of Egypt were being promised to the Sudan, you know, we have to help.
We needed immediate help at that time. Egypt always pictured America as the big sister country, and Egyptians never had a problem of having Americans over in Egypt. But do you think that view has changed over the years?
You know, I really cannot. The image of Egypt by Americans, or the image of Americans by Egyptians? What do you mean?
Americans by Egyptians.
Yeah, I think that the Egyptians were disappointed. I know, I was there. I talked to ordinary people. I met with, you know, the then Field Marshal El-Sisi. I met with the Minister of Tourism, the Minister of Intelligence, the generals, many of whom were trained at the Army War College in the United States, and were very proud of it. And I felt, and so many more people, but I felt that there was a great deal of disappointment. And my mission, after hearing that disappointment, was I wanted Americans to understand what Egypt does for us, okay? And this is a problem that Egypt has, because you haven't gotten that message out, and not critical, maybe you couldn't get it out. But does anybody really understand when Americans say, why do we send all of this money over there? They don't understand what we get in return. We get the flyover rights, okay, when we need it. We get, when we leave a country, the Egyptians come in and back us up with boots on the ground, or back that country up. What Americans don't understand is the priority rights that we get at the Suez Canal. I mean, make no mistake, that's huge. All of that is huge. So that if the Egyptians are willing to march with Americans and to back us up shoulder to shoulder, if the Egyptians are giving us flyover rights, They're giving us priority at the Suez at no charge so that we don't have to go around.
Yeah.
Then, Americans need to know that. And Egypt is 1/4 of the Middle East, and as such, we need to keep our friends.
But don't you think that the American administration was scared that the interim government will take forever and no presidential election will ever happen, and then will be civil wars and...
Look,
I'm trying to play the devil advocate.
I know. And you know what? And what I want to say is, I don't know what was in the mind of our president. I don't. I can't predict what he was thinking, but this is what I can tell you. It was clear that the terrorist attacks that were taking place in the Sinai, all right, and the problem of, the promised areas of Egypt going to this country and that country, that Egypt was on its way to losing its nationality instead having an almost Islamic State, which is what we're seeing with ISIS right now.
Sure.
And I think that America, and I spoke to some people, and I said, look, why don't you support the interim government that is supported by 35 million Egyptians, okay? And they said, well, they don't have their constitution yet. I said, but here's the problem. Morsi suspended the Constitution, and not only did you send him the money then, after he was out, you wanted to send him the money. Okay? And I rest my case.
There's a question that is going on in the media. Why does Judge Jeanine hate terrorists?
It's like asking me why I hate criminals. I mean, I've devoted my life to it. In other words, it's not so much hate. It's like you and I don't care who you are. I don't care where you live.
Yeah.
You want to have a safe family, home life, the ability to feed them, the ability to proceed and pursue whatever dream you may have. I mean, it's the essence of America. The ability to have, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Do you think we're under risk or under potential of having more terrorist attacks here in America, being us ignoring what's going on in the Middle East?
All I know, and do I have intelligence over anyone else? The answer is no. But what I do know is that I think people should live and let live.
Yes.
And when there are people who are dedicated to killing us as Americans, I stand up as an American and I say that's wrong. If there are people who want to come here because they consider us to be the infidel, then I consider that a reverse crusade. I think that what's going on is they want to come here because we're the infidels. I mean, live and let live.
But that's not what they have been claiming the last few years. The terrorists and the Muslim Brotherhood and all these sections, they're trying to come close to America and wanted America to support them to gain democracy. So you think...
But America did support them. America supported the overthrow of Mubarak, who helped us get rid of Gaddafi in Libya, and we threw him under the bus for Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood. And it was the Egyptian people who said, we cannot tolerate this, not America.
There's a saying says that keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. Yeah. Do you think that might be a strategy to avoid the harm of the terrorists? Would that work with the terrorists?
You still want to attribute the best of intentions to people, and I can't say, I can't answer what the motivations are.
Okay.
But I know that the Muslim...
Is it dangerous to bring them closer? That's what I'm trying to get to.
I think in the United States that there's a different feeling about the Muslim Brotherhood. I think that our administration feels that the Muslim Brotherhood hasn't hurt Americans, and they want to integrate them. And I think they need proof that they're here to hurt Americans before they do anything. And that's what America's all about. Free speech, free practice of religion, that kind of thing.
Now Egypt has a new president, President Sisi. How do you expect things going on forward for the Egyptian people?
What's interesting is I talk to people in Egypt, and I understand that the new president was a part of a cycling marathon.
Yes.
And I said, I love that. I mean, the Americans need to see this president, and we all have this perception, and I don't because I've been there, that, you know, everybody's running around on a camel in Egypt, and, you know, here you've got the president who's bicycling, he's in a marathon, and I loved it. I also liked that he went to see one of the young girls who was injured.
She was raped.
She was raped, and I think that speaks volumes for, given the circumstances.
He felt guilty about it because that happened during the celebration of his becoming a president.
Right.
So he felt very guilty about it, and he made the trip to the hospital, and his wife actually went the next day as well. So
well, and that's
very supportive.
You know, I have hope for the Egyptian people, but here's the problem. You've got a country that its biggest industry, as I understand it, and I could be wrong, is tourism. And in order for Egypt to survive, you've got to have that GDP up to 10% for the next 10 years. And part of that is tourism. And people are not going to go to Egypt if they don't think it's safe. So I think that the president has a great deal on his plate. He has to convince the world that it is safe, that people like, who were the Koreans in the Sinai who were killed, and the president has to work on the economy. I mean, I understand that Amr Moussa is going to be involved in the new administration, who is someone who I believe may have run for president before, but is a businessman. And I think there's got to be more development, but most important is that so much of your country is under the age of 35. Is it 60%? Something like that.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's like 55% or more.
Yeah, and you know, give or take. And you know, everyone wants to work. And there's a lot on his plate. He's got to really, really deliver, and I wish him well.
Do you think it's easy for him to work under pressure from other countries and neighbors, and all these problems happen in the Middle East, or does he need American help?
Well, I don't think there's any question that he needs American help, but I also think there are other places that will help him. And I think that America has to be smart about recognizing that Egypt is in a fight for survival right now. You've got 90 million people. Every 9 months, another million people are born. And, you know, Egypt is going to do, and I think El-Sisi is not only a smart man, I think that he is a reluctant politician. And by that I mean, I don't get the sense that, you know, what a lot of the media says here, that he was a man who said, you know what, let's go overthrow Morsi, I want to be president.
No.
And what Americans don't understand about Egypt is that the Egyptian people from the time of the Pharaoh have a connection to the military and to the protectors. In America, there's something like only 1% of Americans have someone who is presently in the military. So we are suspect and cynical, and yet the Egyptian people have an affinity and a connection. And I think that he is a man who understands chain of command. He understands and makes hard choices, and I think that he might be a great leader. He is a young leader right now, and I think that every move he makes will be looked at carefully. And unfortunately, with the sentencing today of the journalist, I think that again there's going to be a lot of skepticism and cynicism by Americans who don't understand your justice system.
The thing is, I don't think Sisi has anything to do with what happened today. I mean, it's a court system, and there's appeals, and you know, there's more evidence has to be shown. But we'll talk about it more after we come back on this break.
One that will have a huge impact, not only on the Middle East, including the state of Israel, but on every man, woman, and child in the United States. It all started when one of my opening statements went viral in Egypt. I called out President Obama for continuing to support Muslim brother President Morsi after more than 33 million Egyptians came out of their homes to protest this so-called democratically elected president. The problem? He suspends the Constitution, imposes Sharia law, puts himself above any checks and balances, creating a theocratic government like the Ayatollah in Iran, and he issues a presidential order releasing condemned terrorists from prison. On my recent visit to Egypt, I met with many government leaders and ordinary Egyptians who were very disappointed in the recent breakdown of U.S.-Egyptian relations. Those relations have been mutually beneficial for decades, from the Camp David Peace Accords, where Egypt was the first Arab country to recognize the State of Israel. It's the Obama administration's feckless foreign policy, the dithering and the doublespeak, and the refusal to support an ally, Egypt, in this dangerous time that creates the type of vacuum that allows terrorists to move in. Those terrorists, now present in Libya, continue to train and prepare for more attacks on the West. Now, Egypt has always given us flyover rights over their country and preferential treatment at the Suez Canal. After 9/11, Egypt shared intelligence and jointly interviewed al-Qaeda prisoners. But most important, Egypt, at the crossroads of Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean, is geopolitically positioned to provide stability in the Middle East. Yet Obama refuses to give the military support promised and allocated for Egypt to fight al-Qaeda and the terrorists who threaten to destroy that country. Something in return. It's called consideration. Example, you have a house for sale. I give you money, you give me the house. Apparently, President Obama was playing golf when they taught that class in law school. Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Judge Jeanine Biro. Thanks for being with us tonight. Do you remember right after he was elected, President Obama ran to Cairo to give his first foreign policy speech where he proclaimed that he wanted to seek common ground with the Muslim world, that his was a new presidency, and that he was no George Bush.
There must be a sustained effort to listen to each other, to learn from each other, to respect one another, and to seek common ground. As the Holy Quran tells us, be conscious of God and speak always the truth.
Mr. President, with all due respect, I have news for you. George Bush was more popular in the Arab world than you are right now. The truth? Your indecisive, unclear, and feckless foreign policy has literally run our relationship with that region into the ground. And here's the rub. You've been giving billions of our dollars to countries who not only give us nothing in return, but who literally hate our guts.